And now we bring you Killer Wives, Episode 10, Antifreeze. These are the case facts against Lynn Turner, who poisoned her husband, her boyfriend. Isn't trust a bitch? Atlanta, Georgia. Residents of famed Elton John and Cardi B, but also famous for the death of Maurice Turner and Randy Thomas by one woman.
What's your emergency? 18 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant. You have a callback for 86 into Central? Negative K, nothing further. Just see the cabbie in the corner.
Welcome to another episode of Killer Wives. For those of you who don't know, there is a common theme internationally that women kill the people closest to them, such as their husbands, their children, and parents. Men, on the other hand, have a tendency to kill people that they don't know. Now, to that end, there is a biblical verse that says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil." Which pretty much means that if you find an evil wife acting this way against her husband, you can pretty much trace her motivations back to achieving money or the prevention of one of those actors taking her money. The following case on Killer Wives proves that verse to be soundly true. On March 2nd, 1995, Georgia police officer Maurice Glenn Turner, age 31 at the time, was rushed to the emergency room in ill health, complaining of flu-like symptoms. Officer Glenn was treated there, and when he felt better, the treating physician released him to go home. Most unfortunate for Officer Glenn, though, the next day his wife found him dead when she came home. It was believed at the time that Officer Glenn Turner died of natural causes after being apparently sick with the flu. His wife, Lynn Turner, at the time aged 27 years, stood to collect around $153,000 in insurance death benefits for her husband's death, along with a monthly police widow's pension of $700. At the time of the officer Glenn's death, his wife Lynn, unbeknownst to Glenn, was cheating around with a firefighter from a neighboring Forsyth County by the name of Randy Thompson, aged 32 years. Now here's where the story gets tricky. Although Glenn Turner and Randy Thompson never met one another, their deaths were identical. Both men came down with flu symptoms within 6 years of each other. But Glenn's mother at the time of his death refused to accept the medical examiner's findings of natural causes. Glenn, an outgoing police officer for Cobb County, Georgia, had no known health problems, and this is why his mother wasn't convinced. In fact, he was strong as an ox. 8 years before his March 3rd, 1995 death, Glenn had survived a near-fatal motorcycle wreck, shortly after waking from a coma and then returned to his job a few weeks later. In the case, the coroner said Glenn, found dead by Lynn, his wife of only 19 months, had an irregular heartbeat and an enlarged heart. Now, his mother says he never had any such thing that I knew about, said Kathy. But in the days before his death, Glenn had severe flu-like symptoms, among them vomiting and diarrhea. He missed 3 days from work and was admitted to Kennestone Hospital emergency room, where he was given intravenous fluids and medications, then released, as I said before. Now, Lynn would later tell Glenn's friends that her husband had returned to their Marietta, Georgia home and taken a bizarre turn for the worse. Waking after midnight, she said he was hallucinating, trying to jump off the balcony because he thought he could fly. He went down to the basement where he tried to drink a gasoline, Lynn said. She said she helped him back upstairs, and the following morning when he was feeling better, she served him Jell-O. Now, what Lynn forgot to tell Glenn's friends was that the Jell-O she served him was laced with antifreeze to kill him. For those of you who do not know, here are the signs and symptoms to expect if someone has been poisoned by antifreeze. You know, in general, antifreeze poisoning occurs in 3 stages. The first stage of antifreeze poisoning typically begins within 30 minutes and 12 hours after a person ingested. The chemical ethylene glycol in antifreeze affects the central nervous system first. Early symptoms of antifreeze poisoning may appear similar to those of alcohol intoxication. So you will always hear in these cases that it appears as the person was drunk, just like she said. Now, these symptoms can include loss of coordination, slurred speech, or jumbled speech. The person may appear dizzy or dizziness, fatigued or being tired, headaches, euphoria or feeling great. I feel very great. You may see them experience nausea and vomiting, seizures, and ultimately a coma. Now, once we get to the second stage of that antifreeze poison, when it really gets into your body, people who generally enter the second stage of antifreeze poison within 12 to 24 hours after ingestion. During this stage, the body continues to metabolize the chemicals in antifreeze into toxic acids. These acids lower the pH level of the blood, which leads to a condition called metabolic acidosis. At this point, antifreeze poisoning will start to affect multiple organs, including the kidneys, the brain, the lungs, and liver. People in the second stage of antifreeze poisoning may experience an irregular heartbeat, shallow breathing, changes in blood pressure, dehydration for sure, because they're doing more vomiting and they have more diarrhea. They will experience fatigue, confusion. Now, a person may also lose consciousness, as in both of these cases, or go into a coma at this stage. A doctor may suggest more aggressive treatment for a person in the second stage of antifreeze poisoning. And then there is the last stage that you will find Glenn in, and her second husband, which she's going to poison the exact same way. Now, the third stage of antifreeze poison occurs 24 to 72 hours after ingesting it. If a person does not receive treatment, a buildup of calcium oxalate crystals can lead to kidney failure. And once you have kidney failure, you are done. Now, back to our story. After poisoning her husband and conveniently staying away from home while he was ill, Lynn returned a few hours later. Once Lynn entered the house, she found Glenn's lifeless body wrapped in blankets on the bed in the guest room where he had been sleeping recently. He was in that guest room because she had separated from him within the same house within 6 months of marrying him. When the detective arrived, Lynn told him what had happened and took him to the basement where he photographed the gasoline can and next to it a large blue container of antifreeze. But to know Lynn a little better, I believe we need to view her complete background since childhood. I believe Julia Lynn Womack Turner was adopted as an infant by Helen Womack, a legal secretary, and her husband. The couple were so happy to have a child, they spoiled her beyond reason, buying her expensive toys and clothes. But when Lynn was 5, Helen divorced and raised her daughter on her own until remarrying some years later. That's where the problem began. There were tensions between Lynn and her stepfather, D.L. Gregory. And a young teenager, Lynn's problems grew. She was admitted to an Atlanta drug clinic for treatment. Now, it is at this drug clinic that I believe Lynn developed a fascination of what ingesting poison and medicines did to control the human body. From her early childhood, she came to value the fancy things that money could purchase, and when she was spoiled by her adoptive parents. So, surprisingly, in her early 20s, Lynn began pursuing a job in law enforcement. So this would be her draw to law enforcement and people who are first responders. Lynn went to work as a 911 operator and also took a civilian position with an undercover narcotics unit in Chattanooga, Tennessee. In this position would gain Lynn a new fascination of how drugs perform in the human body. Now, outside of work, she hung around with cops, spending time clubbing, hot tubbing, and shooting pool. It was at the apartment of a suburban Atlanta patrolman where a group of officers had gathered before a night out of dancing that Lynn finally met Glenn, her future husband, the man she would kill for the first time. Shortly after their 1991 introduction, Lynn, then 22 years of age, began relentlessly pursuing Glenn, buying him such things as exotic snakeskin cowboy boots and tickets to sporting events. Glenn's friends thought it strange that this shapely and attractive brunette with aspirations for the high life would be attracted to their middle-class buddy, whom they nicknamed Buddha because of his large build. Now, I'm sure Glenn didn't think that he could get that type of woman, says Sylvia Browning, a Roswell, Georgia police detective. So she's a friend of his. He felt she wasn't in his league and that she was a great catch. So isn't it funny we think the people that are great catches in our life may turn out to be the people that usually hate us or wish us dead? Now, Glenn's circle of cop friends who jokingly called themselves the Rat Pack weren't so sure. Now, Lynn, from what they saw, was a big spender who always seemed on the make. She flirted with everybody, says Glenn's friend Donald Cawthorn. She often seemed to need to be the center of attention. Lynn also had a brittle temper. Now, Glenn's sister, Linda Hardy, noticed that Lynn had an ability to go from being sweet to being hateful within seconds. To Linda, the only thing the couple seemed to have in common was that they were both NASCAR fans. Lynn had bought herself an expensive pace car similar to the one she admired at the Daytona 500, and she and Glenn regularly attended the races together. Way back in 1992, Lynn applied to become a police officer herself. Fairly athletic, she breezed through the rigorous physical trials, but failed the psychological exam. I wonder why. Now, afterwards, she told Glenn that it was humiliating for her to remain as a dispatcher and begin scheming to find a higher paying and more prestigious position on the police force. When nothing turned up, she began regularly calling in sick at work. Meanwhile, Glenn told his buddies that he was in love and showed them an engagement ring he had gotten for Lynn for Christmas. This is going to turn up the heat a little bit in that relationship and bring him that much closer to death. So, to his friends, he pulled out that little ring from a box and said, "Oh," his buddies, "oh, you've lost your mind." Exactly, said, "You have lost your damn mind." 2 months later, Glenn moved in with Lynn, and the couple set a wedding date for August of 1993. On the day that Glenn married Lynn, he would have little over 2 years left to live. Now, long before then, at his fiance's urging, Glenn named Lynn the beneficiary on his insurance policies. When they found out, the Rat Pack were shocked. To this day, they don't know if Glenn realized that Lynn was facing a world of debt. Her house and car payments nearly amounted to her take-home pay. Her annual salary was less than $20,000, and she faced hefty charges for over-the-limit spending of her credit cards and in her checking account. Now, Glenn's mother felt funny as the wedding day approached. Lynn was such a strange girl, Kathy said. As if an omen, the couple was unable to light the unity candle during the wedding ceremony. and Glenn's brother James offered a less than cheerful traditional best man's toast at the reception. He says, "I feel like I'm more at a funeral than at a wedding." Now, I don't see this working out, but I hope for the best, he said. The Rat Pack took bets as to how long the marriage would last. Can you believe that? They would have been right. In fact, the couple's relationship began to fray even before the honeymoon was over. Lynn was furious that Glenn had booked them on a family cruise instead of a luxury version. So she's going back to loving the money more than the man she get the money from. So, soon after their return, Glenn complained to his buddies that Lynn was suffering from female problems and could no longer participate in their once very active sex life. Now, how many of you guys heard this before? After the wedding, what? So, 6 months into the marriage, the two took to sleeping in separate bedrooms. 6 months later, still Glenn catered to his wife, says his writing partner at the time, David Dunkerton. He'd call her while we were working and say, "Hey, can I bring you something to eat?" Most of the time, she was downright rude to Glenn. He'd hang up and say, "Why do I even bother?" Now, Lynn continued to spend wildly, buying a Datsun 240Z on a credit card and booking out-of-town pleasure trips. But these pleasure trips were for other things that she was doing behind his back. To keep up with the bills, Glenn, whose salary was in the $26,000 range, began to work an extra job at a gas station. And still, Lynn put him on a budget that last week of his life. And this is what his sister said. $20 a week. Finally, he had enough. Once dedicated to saving his marriage, Glenn began taking steps towards a divorce. 10 days before his death, which occurred on the day he was to move out, Glenn told a friend that Lynn had threatened to shoot him with his service revolver. He said, "If anything happens to me, Dunkerton, look at Lynn. She would have done it to me." Now, Kathy Turner was as suspicious as Glenn's friends were after her son's death. Scanning the autopsy report, she made a list of questions. At the top, a green substance in Glenn's stomach at the time of death, which Kathy thought might have been the Jell-O Glenn had been eating while sick. Still, she wanted to have further testing done, but was told that could only be accomplished if she paid a private autopsy, which cost several $1,000s at the time. She said, "I don't have that kind of money." His mother, who cleans house for a living at the time, she didn't have it. When she contacted Glenn's friends, the guys bitterly complained about how emotionless Lynn seemed at Glenn's funeral. Several had overheard her saying, "I've got to get the hell out of here," at the funeral home, and spotted her walking hand in hand with another Cobb County police officer. Now, Kathy and the Rat Pack agreed that if foul play was involved in Glenn's death, Lynn definitely had something to do with it. They decided to talk to as many of the higher-ups as they could, hoping that his death would be further investigated. Now, what they didn't know at that point was that 4 days after Glenn was buried, Lynn, his wife, rented an apartment listing one Mr. Randy Thompson as occupant. Lynn had actually become involved with Randy less than a year after marrying Glenn. So, less than a year after marrying Glenn, she got involved in a relationship with another man. As she'd done with Glenn before, she aggressively courted Randy, buying him gifts and taking him on a week-long cruise. So when she was out of town, like I explained before, it was with Randy. Now, Randy was a divorced father of one. He had no idea his girlfriend was married, so he didn't know. Randy Thompson was a rugged Forsyth County Sheriff's deputy who had eventually become a firefighter in the long run. Like Glenn, he was a jocular kind of free-spirited man. His sister, Kimberly Savage, an epileptic, remembered how as a child she once had a seizure in a school bus. She said he protected her and tried to hide her from everybody because he knew that it bothered me to be seen that way. When Randy loved, she says, he loved with his whole heart. By most accounts, Lynn was generally crazy about Randy. So they thought she was crazy about it. And he was equally smitten. In the summer of 1995, using some of the $150,000 from Glenn's insurance benefits, Lynn bought a house for her and Randy. In January 1996, she gave birth to their daughter Amber, which means that she got pregnant shortly after her first husband's death. Less than 2 years later, a son Blake was born. Lynn was a good mother, says Randy's family, and yet and still Lynn refused to marry Randy. In the future, on the witness stand, the sister of Randy, Thompson, the man Lynn Turner had 2 children with following the death of her husband, will testify that Turner said her late husband, a police officer, was killed in the line of duty. So this is one of the first lies she's telling a new family that has adopted her, that her previous husband was dead in line of duty, not that she killed him with the jello. Actually, Lynn Turner died the same way Bollinger's brother would die 6 years later. Randy gave her an engagement ring, but she never wore it, recalls Kimberly. The reason Lynn gave us for not wearing the ring was that her fingers were swollen and she couldn't get it to fit on her hand. Now, I'm sure it hurts him a lot, she said at the time. Some suggested that Lynn resisted because if she married Randy outright, she might no longer be eligible for Glenn's deceased benefits that went to her. That's $700 a month. You remember that? She thought she might not get his pension any longer. Meanwhile, by early 1997, Lynn had convinced Randy to name her the beneficiary on his life insurance policy. So we're going around the same circle again. The following year, at Lynn's suggestion, he increased the policy amount from $100,000 to $200,000. By then, their relationship had begun to sour in 1997. Just like before, Lynn claimed Randy hit her in the mouth with his fist and charged him with battery, for which he was fined $400 and sentenced to 10 months of probation. Randy, who had gone through a period of heavy drinking following the end of his first marriage, buckled emotionally. She knew how to push his buttons and did on a regular basis, says Kimberly. On 2 occasions, they can remember, he took an overdose of pills, hoping, if not to die, to get Lynn's attention. Now, in 1999, he moved out of the house, leaving his girlfriend, as he said, for his sanity. Still, he held out hope for reconciliation for the sake of the children, then ages 5 and 2. On January 19th of 2001, Lynn and Randy got together to talk about working things out. 3 days later, Randy died alone on the couch in his apartment. He was 32 years of age at the time. Randy, like Lynn, suffered severe flu-like symptoms. Remember what I told you about antifreeze? And he was not able to keep anything down but fluids and jello in the days before his death. He sought help at the emergency room only to become increasingly ill after returning from the hospital. At that time, he was vomiting and gasping for breath. At the worst of it, he called a fellow firefighter, Paul Adams, who arrived to find his friend amid overturned furniture, disoriented and panicky, asking a question, "Do you think I'm gonna die?" Now, the next morning, another firefighter, Barry Head, discovered Randy's dead body with a blanket pulled around him, exactly the way Lynn Turner had been found before. Remember, just 6 years before. She did it again. An autopsy cited an irregular heartbeat as the case. See, deja vu. The day of his burial, Lynn was on the phone to Randy's insurance company. Now, she was shocked to learn that his policy, which was worth $200,000, had been canceled months before for non-payment of premiums. But Lynn was not the only one dialing the phone. Mike Archer, Lynn Turner's former sergeant on the police force, was temporarily working at a car dealership at the time of Randy's death. So he was at the car dealership. He was mightily surprised to discover that Lynn had phoned the lot one afternoon asking to borrow an automobile to attend her boyfriend's funeral. You can never tell what things will happen when you do this, right? Now, Mike got in touch with Kathy Turner. He says, "Now I know what I'm talking about." He said this excitedly. "She did both of them, I guarantee you." This is what he said. Kathy knew it in her gut too. But I kept saying to Mike, "What in the world can I do? I don't know what to do." Glenn's friends did. They started calling police departments all over. He said, "Get on the phone," Archer told Donna Cawthorn. "I'm calling Forsyth County. You call Cobb County and let's raise some hell. She killed 2 now. They've got to listen to us." But will they? Meanwhile, Kathy got in touch with Randy Thompson's mother, Nita. The two women, along with the Rat Pack, members' friends from the 1st Police Force, they helped inspire Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Jane Hansen to write a series of articles about the similarities surrounding the men's deaths. Lynn Turner wasn't just a romantic link, Hansen wrote. She was a messenger of death. She was, as one expert described in her story, the Black Widow. And you've heard the story before. Wives who kill their husbands are referred to just like the insect, or the arachnid, a Black Widow. Now, the press coverage helped to lead a reevaluation of Randy's autopsy results. A forensic pathologist from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations found in his kidney tissue a significant amount of calcium oxalate crystals. This is a telltale signature of ethylene glycol poisoning, like I explained to you before. In layman's terms, Randy had been pickled in antifreeze, the very substance in the 1995 police photograph taken in Glenn's basement. Now, detectives now mounted a homicide investigation. So in July 2001, officials exhumed Glenn's body and tested for ethylene glycol. The findings, my friend, confirmed what many had suspected. He had also been poisoned with antifreeze. Lynn had likely administered the sweet and odorless substance over a period of days in jello, tea, and soup. Now, Lynn Turner was charged with the murder of Glenn Turner in November of 2002 and stood trial for his death alone in 2004, although the court allowed the prosecution to introduce similar transaction evidence, bringing in Thompson's death. That meant that jurors heard about the similarities of Randy's demise, though Lynn had yet to be charged with the crime. So, the former 911 dispatcher, the wives of these two guys that are now dead, who sat stone-faced through most of the trial, but bragged to reporters that she'd go free, was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. So, the DA at the time, Patrick Head, he said if she hadn't done it twice, she would have gotten away with it. If she hadn't done it twice, she would be free. In the year October of 2004, Lynn Turner was indicted for Thompson's death, but a trial date had not been set. If found guilty, she could get the death penalty. So, retired Georgia criminal profiler Ralph Stone says Lynn's a psychopath. She gets along with people by faking normal emotions. Did she do this because of financial reward? It's much deeper than that. As if she wanted to say, they tell me I'm not smart enough to be a cop. Well, I'm smarter than the police. They'll never figure this out. Now, each year, his friends, the Rat Pack, gathered at Glenn's grave. David Dunkerton, who says he'll never have a partner like Glenn again, had a new tattoo on his arm last time that they went to the St. Michael's as a patron of saints of the police. Now, Glenn's old badge number is designed in that tattoo. That is, he said, to show how much he means to me. This was a sweetheart of a guy who fell in love with a she-devil, and she'll ultimately pay when she meets her maker. Now, following the jury trial, Julia Lynn Turner was convicted of malice murder in connection with the poisoning death of her husband, Glenn Turner. The jury's verdict, the evidence reveals that Turner's husband, Glenn A. Cobb, a county police officer, died unexpectedly on March 3, 1995. For several months prior to Glenn's death, he had been having marital problems with Turner, and he confided to two of his close friends and colleagues that if he ended up dead, Turner probably would have had something to do with it. Now, as his marital problems with Turner continued, Glenn decided that he would move out of their home on the weekend of March 3, 1995. A few days before his planned move, however, Glenn became very ill and went to a hospital complaining of nausea and flu-like symptoms. Glenn was given fluids for dehydration and medicine for nausea and discharged. The next morning, Turner served Glenn green jello, a food that would not show signs of being laced with antifreeze if it contained such a poison. Why would somebody do this? Why would somebody who promised to love, honor, and church do something like this? Turner left Glenn at home after feeding him the jello, and Glenn died within a few hours. Now, although Glenn's autopsy reveals signs of antifreeze poisoning, The Cobb County medical examiner concluded at the time that Glenn died of a heart attack. Soon after Glenn's funeral, Turner collected nearly $250,000 from Glenn's estate and from insurance proceeds and death benefits as a primary beneficiary under Glenn's insurance policies. In most of these cases that we give you on Killer Wives, like I said before, money being the root of all evil. So, for days after Glenn's funeral, Turner moved in with Randy Thompson, a man with whom she had been having an affair prior to her husband's death. Thompson died 6 years later. 3 days before Thompson's death, he spent the evening with Turner and had dinner with her. A few hours later, he became violently ill, and the next day he went to the emergency room with complaints of flu-like symptoms, just like Glenn. Thompson was treated for his symptoms and discharged from the hospital. The following night, Turner fed him Jell-O, and Thompson was found dead the next morning. Turner himself, who had been incurring substantial debt prior to Thompson's death, collected over $30,000 as a beneficiary under Thompson's life insurance policy. So his wife, Mrs. Police officer's wife, now fire department officer's wife, stood to gain money. It was her whole modus operandi for a living, it seems like. So, a Georgia Bureau of Investigation toxicologist studied urine and blood samples from Thompson and discovered the presence of ethylene glycol, a poisonous substance found in antifreeze. When further tests confirmed the presence of antifreeze in Thompson's body, a GBI medical examiner determined the cause of Thompson's death to be ethylene glycol toxicity, a rare type of poison and typically caused from ingesting of antifreeze. So, after learning that Turner's husband had also died unexpectedly a few years earlier, the medical examiner ordered slides of her husband's kidneys, which revealed the same signs of antifreeze poisoning that were present in Glenn's first autopsy. So, I wonder in history, how many people's deaths have been overlooked because they thought the guy died of natural causes, where the wife stood to gain from insurance policies, so much money and property. Getting back to the story, Cobb County authorities then exhumed Glenn's body, and additional tests were performed that confirmed the presence of ethylene glycol in Glenn's tissues. The Cobb County medical examiner revised Glenn's death certificate to show that the cause of death was ethylene glycol toxicity rather than heart-related disease. Thereafter, Turner was charged with murdering her husband. So, we move to after the case, and we'll give you an update. So, here now is an update on this story. In Atlanta, Lynn Turner, the 42-year-old woman who fatally poisoned her husband and later her boyfriend that she refused to marry, right, with antifreeze, died at a state prison where she was serving a life sentence, prison officials said. So the wife that killed these two guys actually died herself. She was found unresponsive in her cell at Metro State Prison and could not be revived, said Sharmil Brooks of the Georgia Department of Corrections. Now, it was concluded from her post-mortem laboratory results that she died of an overdose of her medication. She had been secretly saving her own medications until she had enough to take her own life. So this woman knew about poisons, she knew about medications, and she took the easy way out, but a less painful way than what she gave the guys. So the former 911 operator and wife of two men from North Georgia, who was convicted in 2004 of killing her husband, police officer Lynn Turner in 1995, did this to herself. Authorities first thought he died of natural causes back then, but reopened an investigation in 2001 after her boyfriend, firefighter Randy Thompson, was found to have been poisoned the same way. Now, Lynn Turner's mother, Helen Gregory, said she and Turner's two children, ages 12 and 14, had just visited her at the prison that Sunday. Gregory said her daughter seemed fine physically, but was concerned for her safety. The warden told Gregory that Turner was found dead in bed inside the cell she shared with several other roommates. Now, according to Georgia Bureau of Investigation spokesman John Bankhead, said an autopsy revealed no indication of foul play in Turner's death. Though the case will not be determined until the toxicology tests were done, and they were later done, which found that the medication she used, a heart medication, is what killed her in an overdose. So, for the Men's Channel, for Killer Wives, until we bring you one of these stories again next week, of trying to understand how can somebody claim to love somebody and then take their life. And not only take their life, but do it for insurance, for money. Remember? And I tell you, for money is the root of all evil. Thank you for watching.